How do you know it's time, like someone really is maybe tired, maybe needs you to go? We got somebody coming to the microphone here in the room.
Yeah, just a big yawn might be an indication.
Yawn. It's a good one.
Maria Bennett, you had your hand up.
When people start to fidget, you know that they're not really listening and they're done speaking. I think that's a pretty good sign.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, we've got someone coming to the microphone here.
When they start looking around the room at everything but you, and their eyes are glazed over, it's time to say goodbye.
Voice of experience.
I think just common sense. If the person has been ill, you know you're not going to stay very long.
And one thing to be really mindful of is that a lot of people, if you walk into their room, even if it's in a hospital, they need to host you. And you might not get signals from them. So yeah, common sense. I was always told half an hour is a long enough hospital visit. Don't stay longer than a half an hour. Yes, Helmut.
Sometimes, though, these signals can be misinterpreted. I know that Wanda's talked about her son, for example, who can triple task, and it looks like he's not paying attention, but he totally is. Some people need to be doing something else as they're listening, so don't always assume that because they are doing something else, they're not listening. It's a bit of a slippery, difficult one to determine sometimes.
Thank you.
And Brian Nicholson on the chat line had a very succinct way of asking, and that was ask them. Should I go now?
Ah, yes. Wow, brilliant.
Yep. And,
yep. Ask them. Yep.
And let's see. And Calvin had his hand up.
Okay. Yeah, no, I think that, well, I'm speaking as a pastor, so a little bit different, but we need to go in with a time frame. It's usually wise to come in and say, I'm here for, I can only stay for an hour at the most. And if you approach it that way, when you get close to that period of time, you've got an easy way to exit. It's not uncomfortable or awkward. And if the conversation is lulled, you can simply say, well, I should be getting on to my next visit, or it's been lovely. I do have other things I need to be doing today. So leaving it at that, but having a time frame and letting them know in advance what it is a great help.
Yep, that's very helpful.
That's helpful. Thank you, Calvin. Yeah. And has everybody heard of the hand on the doorknob syndrome? Where you can have the most superficial conversation in the world, and as soon as you put your hand on the doorknob to leave, that's when they start to spill their hearts to you. So that's always a care. If you know that's going to happen, maybe pretend to leave a half an hour before you expected to. I don't know, but it's a real thing, and it's not just visitors in people's homes. Doctors will tell you the same thing. It's just our human nature.
Okay, we just have someone saying it's rude to leave when someone's talking. It can be, but sometimes they say, you begin to get that fidgeting as well, and sometimes you just have to cut it short. That's one thing I always think. And Catherine, you had a comment.
Mary Margaret Boone says, set your time ahead of your visit, and then don't outstay your welcome.
Yeah. I always know that I'm not a big tea or coffee drinker, but when my glass of water is about 3/4 gone, it's time to, begin making motions that things are coming to a close. Although sometimes the person's really engaged and you need to go on, but you have to use your judgment at that point.
There was 2 other questions basically for Darren, I believe. There's one from Patricia. How would you define pastoral care as distinct from a friendly visit? And then Catherine asked earlier, how do you match people? So I don't know if you can maybe put that into both or...
Okay, I'll do them separately because just a long day. I forgot the second question already. But the first one, pastoral care.
That's our next section, Darren.
Yes, that's our next section. So we'll be dealing with that.
We can wait.
And the second question.
How do you match people?
How do you match people? With some care. If you know people have had a long-standing dispute over the years, don't put them together. If you know somebody has a history of talking about such and such, they've got a big hobby, or they've a major interest, or they've had a major life experience, find somebody who might share that. So if the person's done a lot of traveling, invite somebody who's done traveling as well. If somebody doesn't like rock music, don't send them a punk rocker to go visit them. It just you're trying to find people as much as possible. Sometimes some congregations don't have that luxury. They only have 1 or 2 visitors, but you have to, in those cases, you may have to put people together who don't necessarily get along all that well. But if you're in a larger church or have luxury of, 3 or 4 or 5 visitors, try to match people according to interest.
From Catherine. So she said,
Great.
when we were talking about how do you know when your time is up, Catherine says their body is turned away from you, their feet pointing away from you. They get up and actually herd you to the door, and then it dawns on you that they've seen you to the door.
Yes.
Yep, that's pretty clear.
And then I have another one from Mary Margaret. Sometimes it takes people some time to open up, so I would agree with Patricia that you cannot leave people in the lurch. When they open up, be open up to listening to them. Then you have to decide, is this your role or the minister's, and gently guide their questions to others.
Yeah. So again, it's discernment that you need. And just always know you're not going in with your agenda. Let the visitees' agenda set your discussions.
One of the questions that we had going into this tonight was, I think somebody had a bit of discomfort or maybe just questions about how do you visit with somebody who's had a serious illness in the family, or maybe somebody's dying, and, what do you say, what don't you say? And the thing that's very humbling that you learn over the years is that it doesn't, if you say something really inappropriate, yes, that will leave an impact. But whatever you say is not going to be as impactful as your presence. Yeah. So just being there with somebody and just sitting and letting them talk is all you need to do, and they will remember that. And whatever pearls of wisdom roll off your tongue, I hate to tell you this, they might not remember. They'll just remember that you were there. And that eventually becomes a real gift to you as the visitor as well, is that, you know that you were able to provide some comfort just by being a human being and being there with them.
Yeah, sometimes you don't need to say anything. And that's the most appropriate response.
Let's see. I have another one that says, at first, people just tell me about myself, but in time, some people want to know about me and my family. It feels like they want a more authentic relationship. Mm-hmm. Catherine says, Darren has a good point. Not carry our own agenda. Allow yourself to become humble. Patricia says, ask them to tell you about themselves.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. And that's all I have in the chat right now.
Sometimes.
Thank you. And
sorry, go ahead, Wanda.
Okay, I was just going to say that sharing about yourself, if they're asking you specifically, there is, if you never ever say anything about yourself, it does feel inauthentic. It really does. But the point is that you're in service to the person that you are visiting. And so you don't want to make it about yourself. If they ask you questions and you're comfortable answering them, by all means, answer them, and then they do know a little bit more about you, and they'll be that much more connected to you, and the visit will be that much deeper. But it's really up to you what you're comfortable sharing, and but it's when I'm going to tell you a story. My students, when I was a student minister, it was in a farming community, and I remember one of the farmers telling me about a minister years ago who would come and sit in their living room, and they were in the business of artificial insemination, I guess. What's the appropriate term for, yeah. And so they kept talking about getting embryos from Russia. and all this stuff. And he said they would have these conversations. The phone would ring and the minister would be sitting there in the room and they'd have this one-sided, he'd hear them saying about the embryos coming from Russia, wouldn't even acknowledge the phone call and would just go on talking about himself when they hung up the phone. And I'm like, how could you not be curious about embryos coming from Russia? But it's like, and then again, if someone's having a conversation, maybe it's personal, but it is important that you're not there just for someone to listen to you. That's not the role of friendly visiting. We have a question here, a comment here in the room.
It's a very short question. Do we come to, as a visitor, do we come as friends?
You can, that can happen. But it necessarily shouldn't be the goal of a friendly visitor. And sometimes you're visiting people who have been friends over the years, and for whatever reason, they need a pastoral visit right now, or a friendly visit right now. So you need to, sometimes those dynamics change, but sometimes friendships do develop. And I know as ministers, we visit people and suddenly we discover, oh, we're friends. We have interests in common. We have things we share. But I think, go for it, Wanda.
It's so much easier in person.
Yes.
I think it's important that it begin, though, with an understanding that you are representing the church, so that they don't think that they're being neglected by the church. I think that's the goal of friendly visiting, is just to make sure people understand the church cares about them, so much so that we spent our Thursday evening on a rainy night figuring out what this means, and we want to spend our time with you and be that conduit of information back and forth about what's happening in church life, and that it is the church that's visiting. And it might feel awkward to say we're here from the church, especially if it's somebody you've known for decades. But at the same time, it is important, because then they understand that it's not just you. There's a whole community behind you caring. But absolutely, you can become friends.
I'm Carol Dowdle from Zion Memorial United Church in Carlton Place.
Okay. Oh, welcome.
I'm a member of the Friendly Visitors team.
Okay.
We are in the midst of making some changes to our Friendly Visitors team. One of the things that we do as Friendly Visitors is that we have a weekly newsletter that is generated by our office administrator. And our minister, Reverend David Sherwin, makes copies of his meditations each week, as does our office administrator make copies of the newsletter. And we deliver those newsletters on Sunday after service to those people who are who cannot come out to church, who are in long-term care homes, or in their private homes who can't get out. And this has proven to be a very good link between the church and the people who can't come out to services.
That we can talk about. But I am curious about what people decided is the difference between pastoral visiting and friendly visiting. And if you could raise your virtual hand, and I'll rely on Karen and Darren to...
We have one comment here in the chat. Pastoral image of Jesus tending to the flock. Visiting is just that, looking the beautiful flock and leaving Jesus to the care. And another comment was just a great conversation. Perhaps a further session is needed. We have Caitlin, and then Mary Beth, then Mary Margaret, and then Calvin.
Thank you, Darren. Caitlin Ostrander here. In my group, in the very quick discussion after quick introductions, we said that pastoral care visiting is more religious, and normally you do it with an intention. There's a reason why you're going. You understand the dynamic of what you're walking into, and maybe the topic that you'll be discussing. And a friendly visit is more of a check-in. You talk about the weather, what's happening in the church, just seeing how people are doing and connecting them to the community in a more informal way.
We said that pastoral visiting is the distinction, the ultimate distinction is that it's when prayer and or blessings are offered. Whereas friendly visiting, the conversation is less in depth, but still caring.
We talked about the difference and how friendly visiting evolves and people's comfort level changes with you if you've been a visitor for a long term. So that is just knowing when it's time to refer, if you know that person well, when it's time to refer them to the minister or the ministerial team at the church. And I came at it from a different perspective because I am a retired clergy. And for me, it's I do pastoral visits, but I also do friendly visits. And it's when I need to know when it's important to refer to the minister at my charge. And maybe that's a bit easier for me. I'm not sure, but it was a short time to talk about these kinds of things. And it just invites more conversation, I think.
We didn't really have time to differentiate, but what we did discover was friendly visits were very helpful when they were taking communications to what the church was doing. Newsletters, bulletins, that sort of thing. Friendly visits, like a check-in, haven't seen you for a while, hope you're doing okay. But the most important aspect was, what we felt was to bring the people aware that the church was still functioning and they were welcome to be a part of it.
Okay. We just talked about, that there's spiritual things and just knowing what our own limitations are. One of the comments was that if, I'm quite comfortable talking about farming, if you want to talk about farming, but don't ask me about, like spiritual concerns and so it's really important to know what your limits are, what your scope is, and when to bring in, or just to ask them if you could refer to somebody else. And we had someone in our group who does friendly visiting for community care and talked about whether that would be different. When you're friendly visiting on behalf of a church, would it be a different conversation from someone who's friendly visiting for community care? And the feeling was it might be different, but we didn't really get into too much about how it would be different, but that it might be different.
Just thanks everybody for participating in this.
Yeah.
And I hope you found it helpful. And as Wanda said, it is contextual. So, in your own situation, it might be a little bit different, and that's okay. But I'm here to answer questions, and Wanda now has done this workshop, so she certainly can give you some answers as well. But I wish you well on it, and thank you for doing this important work in your church.
Yeah, everybody, thank you so much. This is what being church is all about, is all these connections and just loving each other really well. And you're doing that by being here tonight. You're showing that it matters. So thank you.